Introduction Contact Reports Volume 3 Plagiatist Plagiarinus Kontaktbericht Gespräch Block 3 Page Numbers 167 181 Data Time of Contact Thursday, June 8, 1978 6:14 Translators Benjamin Stevens Date of Original Translation October 15, 2010 Corrections and improvements made in a contact person
Ter.
Quetzal.
And Semjace.
Synopsis. The Plagiarin grow all earthly fruit trees and shrubs in drifting gardens on the Great Spacer. Even extinct varieties. Semjace gives Billy an apple that he later gives to Guido as evidence. One of Martin Buber's articles about the human being is criticized to be erroneous and dangerous. Several UFO frauds are identified: Claude Vorilhon, Coral Mitchell, Elizabeth Clarer, and George Adamski. Discussions about the Semjace Silver Star Center, SOAR Center, and FIGA members. Giza Intelligence's base was completely destroyed and filled in with rock. Certain aspects of the mission on Earth have been planned for over 10 years. This is the entire contact. It is an authorized and unofficial translation and may contain errors.
Contact Report 109 Translation.
Human children, you have rushed me far away.
It had to be, unfortunately. You see, today, the military is in the wide surroundings.
These birds have somehow been maneuvering already for days.
We will let you back down to Earth even further away. Look, over there.
Man alive, that is, indeed, even further away than Stoneberg.
Sure, we were there once, at an earlier time. It must be, however, because safety comes first.
I also have nothing to object to that. But tell me, girl, the apple there beside the viewing screen, have you stolen that from somewhere?
No, it belongs to my provisions.
Where did you get it then? Did you buy it somewhere?
No, not that either. It comes from the drifting gardens of my father.
You mean that it is from Tazkent box, that it grew there and was harvested?
Definitely.
Aha, then you also have such fruits, as we know them here on Earth.
Sure, but they weren't originally native fruits of Era. The apple is from a tree, which comes from a progeny of earthly trees.
Oh, I see. So you have fruit trees that were taken from the earth which you simply continue to cultivate, and you also let these bloom and bear fruit in your Great Spacer. So what kinds of trees do you have, then?
We possess trees, shrubs, and plants of every kind, as they also exist on the earth. There are even various kinds in our drifting gardens, which have already been extinct on the earth for a very long time. But we have preserved them and have made them useful to us. Thus, we have all fruits, as they are also known on the earth with you, and even several more, which you only know through your researches of antiquity, and so on.
That is fantastic. And how do these fruits test today with you? Do they still have the same test as we know it?
You think now of this apple? Sure, the test has remained the same. It is, perhaps, even somewhat more intense than with your apples of this sort, and certainly much better in its juice. But all the other fruit trees from the earth also bear fruits with the tests or flavors known to you. It's just that these, as I've already explained, have become somewhat more intense, since our robots and androids maintaining the trees work on these very attentively and also have great concern for them, as this happens with all plants cultivated by them.
And that apple there, it necessarily has to lie there if you don't want to eat it.
Ha 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 ha, ha 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 ha. You don't understand him, but I do. Even very well.
I mean, is it absolutely necessary that this apple lies there so lonely and isn't eaten? It looks so nice and, thus, appetizing.
I want to eat it, yes, but only later, when I might be hungry. I understand. Of course, sure, you can have it. Just eat it if you feel like it. Oh, how silly of me.
Only half as bad, girl, but I really was alluding to that. But I wouldn't like to eat it right now, but maybe once I'm on the way home again. Until then, I could probably cope with an apple.
Sure, it should be yours. Billy took the large apple and brought it home with him, where he handed it over to Guy de Moosbrugger, who then inserted the apple into a glass of alcohol and made it durable in this manner. The apple still exists today and is still in the same glass under the care of Guido.
Thanks, girl. But now, look here. May I read this to you?
What does it concern, then?
A small excerpt from a book, written by a man by the name of Martin Buber.
Then you better turn with that to Quetzal or to my father. If you want, can I establish a connection with him?
Gladly, if Quetzal is also involved then. It may, in fact, be very interesting to see what the two have to say to this.
Why?
It concerns something specific.
What do you think about the writings of Martin Buber, and about his mind games?
Actually, I think that he reveals a philosophy that is often very wise, but which, in turn, operates completely unrealistically and even brings about dangerous errors.
That is of Korik.
The connection to father is established.
You wish to speak to me. What does it concern then?
I have a matter of concern, Ta. Here, this note. On it, there's an excerpt from Martin Buber, whose literature you evidently know all about, as Semyazit told me just now.
That is of correctness. Let's hear what you have.
This concerns an extract from Images of Good and Evil, and it says, because the human being is the only known living organism in which to some extent, the category of possibility has embodied itself and whose reality is incessantly shrouded by possibilities, it needs, as the only one among all, confirmation. Each animal is established in being what it is. Its modifications are predetermined for it, and when one changes itself into a caterpillar or into a pupa, its change is also a limit. All of this together is what it is, and thus, no confirmation can be necessary for it, so it would be an absurdity if someone said to it or if it said to itself, you may be what you are. The human being, as a human, is a risky venture of life, undetermined and fragile, and therefore he needs confirmation, and he can naturally only receive this as an individual human being by others and he himself confirming him in his being human. Over and over again, the yes must be spoken to him, from the view of the familiar and from the stirring of his own heart, in order to liberate him from the apprehension of being abandoned, which is a foretaste of death. If need be, one can do without confirmation from others, if one's own self increases in such a way that he makes the supplements from others unnecessary. But not vice versa. The words of encouragement of others aren't sufficient if one's self-knowledge dictates the internal rejection, for self-knowledge is unquestionably more independent.
Why have you brought up this erroneous and dangerous excerpt?
Because I also find it erroneous and incorrect.
And what do you think about it?
I wanted to hear your opinion.
I also won't withhold that from you, but I wonder what your thoughts are on this excerpt.
Then you should hear my opinion. I think that Martin Buber has actually brought forth very useful philosophical things, but that with these very serious negative values appear, which are nicely and dangerously woven into the good and lawfully right facts. But now, this excerpt, which was brought to me by someone, and one also underlined this sentence here, appears to me to be such an unrealistic view that I wanted to bring it up with Semjes. I do think that the assertion is very wrong and dangerous, and to be sure, in reference to the modifications of animals compared to human beings. As I was taught, the modification does apply in relation to the animal, and thus, also in relation to the change of its limit, but only in a relative sense, for an evolutionary change in the form of an adaptive change is also given with the animal. The change or limit is, thus only set in the current course, but not in the future course. Diverting this fact toward human beings in a contrary to right sense seems so absurd and dangerous to me that I would like to have this excerpt be cleared up and clarified by you. I also think, in reference to this depiction, that humans are a risky venture of life, that it is quite malicious and injurious to creation allow that something like this can only ever be claimed and
With that, you make a very clear and truthful statement.
Where was I? Oh yes, what I still wanted to say, for what is then said further regarding the continual confirmation, the being abandoned, which should be a foretaste of death, and so on, I had the view that this is even complete nonsense. Especially the being abandoned and the foretaste of death allow me to come to the acceptance that this Martin Buber was ranked among the mass of human beings afraid of death because...
That is of absolute correctness, regrettably, because the man could have done much greater and more valuable things if this fear wouldn't have been in him. But I interrupted you. Continue to state your remarks.
Thanks, Da. The whole thing, in my opinion, boils down to this, that Buber was of the crazy view that human beings, in their doings, actions, feelings, and thinking, and so on, have to be confirmed always and continuously because they need this and can only grow in and of themselves through this. But to me, it also seems to follow from this that Buber was of the opinion that this was the only way that human beings could be upheld in their moral, which I perceive as totally wrong, however, even as crazy. The animal, in contrast to the earth human being, is very much geared toward independently recognizing and acknowledging its modifications in every respect, which gives it the security of its self-strength, its self-knowledge, and its self-confidence, making it very stable. This is so because it is correctly connected to the laws of nature, and these surge through it in an impulse-related manner. Now, the human being, who has fallen away from nature, effeminate, and big thinking in his thought forms, has long since forgotten how to align himself on self-knowledge, self-confidence, and on independence and self-cognition. Through this he comes into the insanity situation, that he can no longer be confirmed, and through this he falls victim to continuous low morale. But in order to make up for this in his delusion, he commonly creeps onto the unreal path of confirmation by his fellow human beings. This means that he becomes of the delusion that he must be confirmed by a constant yes from the view of the familiar and the stirring of his own heart, as Buber says really idiotically, allegedly in order to be freed from the apprehension of being abandoned, which should allegedly be a foretaste of death. Now, I really ask myself how poor in truth a human being must be in himself, if he thinks and writes in this manner, whereby I cannot understand the whole thing, because Martin Buber, on the other hand, brought forth rather real, philosophical truth. Confirmation by others, this is just crazy and nothing but adulation, and this is only needed by human beings who still can't find any healthy self-confirmation or their self-knowledge, their self-strength, or their self-recognition. Just because of this, so I imagine, they must start to reap praise in order to find confirmation through this. If they don't receive this confirmation, however, then their morals sinks away abysmally. They feel pushed away, ignored, and neglected. In addition to this, they increase in ideas and feelings that are absolutely foreign to the truth and to reality, until, slowly but surely, a mania develops from it, which ultimately expresses itself in an almost hopeless fantasy that things actually are as they believe them to be. Already within a very short time, they cannot notice and cannot recognize anymore that, as a rule, no change has been made by fellow human beings or has occurred with respect to the treatment, thinking, and actions toward them. They simply aren't able to recognize this anymore because they are no longer able to grasp the facts and the truth in their confirmation craze. Because of this, they cry out for praise. But if they had the power of a healthy self-confirmation in the lawful sense, then they themselves would know at any time whether what they did, thought, or undertook was and is of a right form and right measure, or whether it exhibits deficiencies, after which they could then act, in this or that case, accordingly in self-cognition. If they are not able to do this, however, then they are still very backward in knowledge and in the recognition of truth in this regard, which, in turn, means that they deliberately resist themselves against the truth and knowledge because a certain egoism is owned by them and shows them that they would have more advantages this way or that they would be better promulgated through this. That is my view, but now, I would like to hear your opinion on this, as well as that of Quetzal and Semjis.
I have nothing to add to your statements. Any further word would be superfluous because I wouldn't even have been able to explain everything better. Your explanations are of very profound and true value, so no further explanation is necessary for that. It would truly be superfluous.
Those words are of deep truth. I can only confirm them.
The entire teaching of the Spirit proves the correctness of your explanation, according to which I can only echo the words of Father and Quetzal. From my point of view, I would just like to mention to this that, unfortunately, it is still very strongly widespread among the human beings of Earth to hold to old and unreal things in an egoistic manner and not to let themselves be taught, for through this, certain advantages can be obtained, and it seems much easier to live with these than without them. But this is a very serious self-deception and self-endangerment, which leads to personal demoralization and causes discord and destruction.
Of course, but that just doesn't want to be accepted. But let's leave this, for if Peta can already be seen from the view screen, then I would still like to ask him another question, which has already been sitting in my stomach for a long time. May I?
Of course, but I also have some explanations to give.
Okay, then I would just like to ask, what's the deal with the so-called Mongaze mages, and what is to be thought of the Frenchman Claude Vourlon, who calls himself a leader in Rail?
Excuse the expression, my friend, but this Vourlon is certainly the craziest wheeler-dealer in matters of alleged contacts with extraterrestrial intelligences. In his order of magnitude, he even surpasses Karl Michalak, Elizabeth Clarer, and George Adamski. Concerning the Mongaze images, there is only so much to say, that they're based on forgeries. First of all, the alleged figure beside the alleged beamship is just a doll. Secondly, even the object itself is just a model. At the time, Anand just wanted to allow himself a joke, but he didn't count on the reaction of those who fanatically concern themselves with such matters. So he then also wrapped himself in silence and hardly lets anyone approach him in this matter. But now, my friend, I still have to give you some explanations, which I would have had to give you one way or another, and thus, I would have become active in your conversation anyway. As a result of the analysis of recent weeks, all sorts of data have now arisen on which I have to take a stand and give explanations. Having to find this weapon useful. Foremost, I would like to say that we were very thoroughly occupied in clarifying the possibilities in reference to your activities. As a result of this extremely thorough clarification, it has become clear that your constant objections are of the greatest entitlement, in relation to the need for your use in and for manual activities at the center. Despite the long learning opportunities of various group members, the time period wasn't used in a decisive form, according to which the necessary knowledge for most occurring works actually isn't available, which truly requires that you, who are mighty in the necessary knowledge, accordingly concern yourself with them and that you give your instructions and also exercise the necessary control. Hence, your work area is the following. 1. In the first and most important place is the fulfillment of all works related to the direct fulfillment of the mission. 2. In second place, your center should attain the right and appropriate formation and should achieve good and maximized returns. Therefore, you should be responsible for planning out the necessary works and for determining the division of work. Thus, it is up to you to determine what types of work should be implemented and where something is to be changed, renewed, or created, and so on. This should be your task in the second place, since you alone have the necessary and appropriate overview of everything according to our analysis. 3. In third place, you should transfer the responsibility for the completion of certain occurring activities and works to yourself, since you are of the conviction that you're in a position to implement these matters better your own way and for the better use of the center and all those involved. 4. The final and ongoing control of all matters and works at the center and around our entire mission, which is in the competence that you all should fall into your responsibility. 5. It is to be determined, according to the advice of the High Council, that you should henceforth take over the leadership position of the center and all related matters for the time that you are still alive. Thus, you should be determinate in the first and last instance, since you alone have the ability to bear this responsibility for the time being. You will have to give decrees, which should be valid as determining in continuous sequence. Failure to comply with these determinations must be punished by an irrevocable exclusion from the group. 6. It is your responsibility in the future to be concerned about the succession of the center's leadership and to train the suitable personality for this, once you are certain of this person. At the same time, your special attention in the material sphere, regarding the factors of anti-materialism and modesty, is valid, and this must be developed in the leader in a good form. And precisely in this relation, we must revise our traditional view toward you, for it now turns out that your great modesty and your pronounced anti-materialism are of very great utility for this task, for through the presence of the same, you do not tend, on the one hand, toward cravings for power, and on the other hand, you are thereby able to teach the suitable person in an authoritative form. But now, this also guarantees you to oversee financial issues clearly and also to check over these in due form, and so on. So we now recognize, through the most detailed analysis, that your modesty and your distinct anti-materialism are of very great value, even if we cannot approve of the fact that you and your family are often in certain need as a result of this, which must truly be brought to a change on your part. These, my friend, are the first instructions that have been prepared by the High Council as guidance for you, and that you should receive in full responsibility so that everything won't still be destroyed. What is now given cannot suffer an iota of failure anymore. Otherwise, everything will collapse, and to be sure, without revocation. But so that this cannot happen, you, as the responsibility bearer for all matters of the group relating to the mission, should henceforth attend to the tasks additionally mentioned to you. In these tasks, you should also be decisive, in that the residents of the center and those responsible for certain tasks and daily work areas are informed by you about their work areas and about their responsibilities. The current residents should be decisive about their work areas in their circles, and their instructions should be as determining in their work areas as your instructions. At the present time, it concerns Jacobus and your Mrs. Cannibal, who are definitively determined by me personally for their work areas. 1. Your Mrs. Cannibal. Her work area is the entire household and all other activities coinciding with it. In her work area, it should be such that neither a male nor a female life form is given her specifications, but rather that she is decisive in every respect, unless you, as the first and last authority, make additional or other arrangements. Quetzal will determine the other and additional female life forms, who should work mainly in the household and who are incorporated into all activities of the arrangements of your Mrs. Cannibal, and age differences do not matter. Thus, your Mrs. Cannibal has to give her arrangements and directions and has to instruct her trained staff in their activities to be performed. 2. Jacobus. His work area is house, yard, garden, land and forest, as well as all other activities related to these. In his work area, it should be such that neither a male nor a female life form is given his specifications, but rather that he is decisive in every respect, unless you, as the first and last authority, make additional or other arrangements. Quetzal will determine the other and additional male life forms, who should work mainly in his work area, and who are incorporated into all activities of the arrangements of Jacobus, and age differences do not matter. Thus, Jacobus has to give his arrangements and directions and has to instruct his trained staff in their activities to be performed. Concerning a representative for cases of sickness and absence, it is determined by me for your Mrs. Cannibal, Maria, the wife of Engelbert. Jacobus, Engelbert. In representation of and also in cooperation with the work area leaders, the determinations of the representatives are valid to the same extent and in the same value as the instructions and directions of the work area leaders. In addition, in the special case, Engelbert still appears, who should take over your representation in cases of sickness and absence of your person, but you have to give him the necessary instructions for this. Everything else, in terms of the works to be done and the rules to be drawn up, and so on, will be explained to you by Quetzal. Concerning these issues, this is all that I had to explain to you.
I think that this was also enough, but apparently, we are now really on the last legs and have no other options left. Very well then. It is just so. But what comes next with my work relating to the mission? You said nothing else about that.
We will regulate that constantly, so that no problems in this connection will arise for you.
Good. But just now I found out that you designate my wife, quite originally, as Mrs. Cannibal. I have, unfortunately, forgotten to ask her whether it is fine for her.
Don't worry. I've registered her thoughts.
Then I'll say nothing more.
It also isn't necessary because her consent is present and given. Declare to your Mrs. Cannibal my dearest and deepest thanks for that. But now, my friend, I have to explain something else further, so namely something of urgency in reference to the Source Center, about which Quetzal will still have to give you a variety of information. In the future time, you should hand over all concerns surrounding the Source Center to those who have been determined by us for this task, so at the present time, to Jacobus and your Mrs. Cannibal. Consequently, you should strive hard to lay down the necessary explanations for the new introduction in written form, so that this can be learned in detail by the responsible persons through good study, in order for them to be able to take over their task to the full extent, so that they can give the introductory explanations, and so on themselves after a certain time. But for the time being, it is still your task to carry out the introductions yourself, but only until the time when both of them will be able to take over this task completely. As an approximation, this period might claim about 12 months to 16 months. But after that, you should only act vicariously. Henceforth, you should also no longer perform other Source Center tasks under any circumstances, except in vicarious form in the case of the illness or absence of one or both of the responsible persons, so of Jacobus or of your Mrs. Cannibal.
And what if one of the two has simply gone to bed?
That is no reason for the fact that they don't fulfill their responsibility. But in special cases relating to this, you can then freely decide whether you want to take over the task of representing, but this shouldn't become the habit. And what I still wanted to explain just now, both of them, so therefore Jacobus as well as your Mrs. Cannibal, must strive in very strict form for the fact that when they enter the Source Center, they truly shut off all their thoughts, which, unfortunately, has not yet been the case in a satisfactory form. This way, they won't impair the vibrations of the Source Center, which then, in turn, find expression in the vibrations of those reclining and affect these negatively. All Source Center users can confirm the difference between the two of them and you at any time because they inevitably have to tell the difference. You can completely shut down all your thoughts in true perfection, and, thus, can stay in the Source Center for a very long time, without any vibration being affected by it, which is also the reason why, just in other regard, and in other values, we can safely approach you. But since your Mrs. Cannibal and Jacobus are not yet able to act in this manner, and are still constantly permeated by thoughts, when they enter the Source Center, the center's vibrations are impaired, and these then settle themselves into those reclining and fill them with restlessness and also impair their exercises. At the same time, true love also plays a very important role, as you do, indeed, know. Differentiated love may in no way be present for the individuals who are to be brought into the Source Center. An authoritative, sincere love must be uniformly given by the representative and responsible person, who is registered by those brought in and whose vibrations are collected. This gives them the security of peace and security itself, as well as the security of love. It is completely clear to us that neither Jacobus nor your Mrs. Cannibal are capable of radiating this necessary love for one's neighbor in such a measure as is owned by you and as you are able to do, but they should both strive very quickly and in good measure to develop and acquire this to certain and authoritative parts. Hence, it would be serviceable to the whole thing if you would instruct them in the next few weeks in this extremely important matter. At the same time, it is of great importance for the two that they can be taught by you, and leave their usual and their own respective wrong ways of thinking aside. Furthermore, the following rules are still to be clearly noted: 12 sentences, covering 4 points of internal information and guidelines. These, my friend, are the most important facts, which I still had to state in this connection, and which were partially worked out by the High Council.
Give them my very dear thanks. But I also wouldn't like to be inferior in these thanks to you and all others, and I think that I may also express to you the thanks of the whole group for all your tremendous efforts. But since we're already at it, concerning the introductions, which I should still carry out at present, how often must I strive there for the people?
You have enough experience in this relation, such that you can decide this yourself. As I have personally noted, the male persons, as a rule, require an introductory explanation, after which they can then be briefed by those responsible for the SOAR Center. In very few cases, it will be necessary that you take over this additional task yourself and even spend the time there, while the first exercises are being completed. In reference to the female persons, however, the case is quite different, which is due to the age-old suppression and lower valuation of woman by the men of Earth. For them, it is almost always required that you take over the explanation, which must even be several times in various cases, as you yourself have noted. Depending on the development of your Mrs. Cannibal, this could still also be the case when she is already fully responsible for this task, depending on the sensitivity of the female person concerned, but this will turn out then from case to case. But in isolated cases, this will also be the case with male persons, when they require this in their sensitivity.
Good. That's clear. But what's the case now with those who simply want to use the center for the meditation? So, for example, Madeline, who has already been with us for some time, but also Connie, the daughter of Marianne and Gilbert, but in addition, even others.
You know that all those core group members, who strive in a sincere form and very seriously for their evolution, should have the right and the duty to use the SOAR Center. But to decide this is solely the responsibility of those concerned. It is necessary, however, that the internal group is clear about whether the sincerity and seriousness are actually given, after which it then has to decide if and when the person concerned can use the SOAR Center as a core group member. In the final analysis, however, the persons leading the center in this respect, namely the group's board of directors, have to give the final word on this, and to be sure, both now as well as in later times.
That's clear, and with that, I should actually have all questions answered by you, which I wanted to know from you.
I, however, am not yet at the end, for I now have to give you some concluding explanations, which you should separate and which are neither determined for the internal group nor for the public.
As you wish, my son.
Also the individual assessments, which are still to be explained to you by Quetzal after my last remarks, are to be treated in such a way that they do not become known to the entire internal group or to the public after the report transmissions. These assessments solely apply to the group members concerned, who are to be named in particular.
Okay, I can arrange that, but it will cost me a great deal of effort if I have to separate everything and arrange it in a list.
I won't transmit the transmissions to you in the usual form, but will program our transmission apparatuses in such a way that you can receive the transmissions at will, whereby you're only bound to time to the extent that you should be finished with your work by 30 am on Sunday, the 11th of June.
That can be arranged.
With that, your problem is already solved for you.
Of course.
Then I can begin with my last remarks, which you should treat as declared in a separate form.
Of course, my son, I've already accepted this. Just fire away with it at last. But wait, first of all, may I still direct another question to you regarding the Giza-twerps?
This had to come, but just ask.
Good, thanks. It would interest me and all others what was actually done with all the underground buildings, with the equipment and the ship and the rooms, after you transported the fellows away. Are you allowed to give me information about that?
But of course, all equipment in the ship were completely eliminated by us, as well as the buildings that were erected in the rooms. The rooms themselves were then filled with solid matter, namely with rock and other matter. This was done on the technological basis of the and rematerialization.
Then today, practically nothing points to the former existence of these things anymore.
No, for it had to be.
I understand. But did you also fill in all the other corridors and rooms?
No, we let these remain, of course. Only everything that was necessary was destroyed.
Good, this answer is already sufficient. Then you can now bring up the other concerns. Test separate, non-public remarks. Ouch, that is hard, my son, but I'll probably have to bite the bullet. It's just that I do not yet know how I should explain all that.
When you give the transmission to read, the situation will arise from it by itself.
Hopefully, my son, hopefully. Man, that is really a blow to the mind.
Unfortunately, it was unavoidable, but it will pass if some reason is brought to application.
The devil knows that something croaked must constantly run, but it probably can't be any different.
Unfortunately, it does, in fact, seem to be like that. But now, my friend, I must conclude our conversation because I have to attend to my duties again. Be at peace, because the problems are solvable. Till we meet again, my friend.
Till we meet again, Peter, till we meet again.
You are very sad.
That is certainly understandable. It already passes, my dear friend. Don't be too upset. Everything will already turn to the better, if just a little effort is made toward reason.
Human child, do you actually know what a hell it is?
Such is now burning within you, I know. But nevertheless, we still need to discuss the remaining things. Our time is no longer long, and as it looks, we must perform a leap through time, in order still to be able to meet our commitments at the appointed time.
Okay, then go ahead. Moreover, it can only be right for me if I'm at home a little earlier. Maybe someone can still pick me up with the car, if I can still telephone them early. Unfortunately, I can't use a radio because I forgot the damn device at home, as well as my shooting arrow, or I didn't know that I'd have to go so far away.
You should also carry your weapon with you when we come very close to you. But now, listen carefully to the assessments that I have to explain to you. The new regulations in reference to the internal group are in accordance with the advice of the High Council the following. 1. The internal group is composed of 49 members in its final number. The composition of the internal group was planned and formed in its early stages by the members who were meritorious in their other personalities of previous lives and who had made themselves determinant in the circle of truth announcers at very early times, which dates back to several thousands of years. The number of these members appearing at the present time was calculated with 35, some of which having already come together in the new grouping. But through betrayal, irrationality, ignorance, defamation, demand for might, material craze, and lust, several members weren't found in the new values and were much too attached to, confused by, and dependent on the material world of today. This led to discord and strife, greed for power and falsehood, as well as to the neglect of all duties among themselves and toward each other within the group area as well as in reference to the mission. Departures of unreasonable, faulty, and ignorant group members were the consequence, by what means the entire planning was destroyed which was prepared and pursued for more than 10,000 years. Through this, all the data of the previous efforts were not only muddled, but also mostly destroyed, requiring a new regulation. It is to be explained to this, that it concerns the solution of a lost possibility which is now to be strictly followed and exhausted. Renewed failures, degeneracies, and negations may not result. Otherwise, no other solution of a possibility will be given anymore. So this means that a renewed failure excludes any other possibility and solution, which means that even this last planning would be destroyed without revocation and without a possibility and without a solution of a further planning. This means that in such a case, there would be no further progress in our mission, and this would have to be conclusively aborted and abandoned. 2. The new regulations now appear in this form. The number of the 49 of the internal group, the core group, continues unalterably. Nevertheless, a change occurs in this, which is that due to the absence of various important and predetermined group members, new and still not predetermined and not prepared members must be drawn in, who must be introduced and initiated into their work areas and areas of duty. This is the duty and task of the already existing core group, which henceforth has to attend to this task in its sole learning responsibility. When, as has been predetermined, various new group members will appear, the internal group will be informed after they appear. Therefore the group shall be informed when new predetermined group members arrive. In reference to new group members to be appointed as part of the 49, however, all responsibility, determination, instruction and orientation is incumbent on the members of the internal group. 3. The values of the next incarnation of the still remaining group members of the internal area change in this respect, in that uniformly per group member, a shift of 27 years takes place, whereby 27 years are to be added to the data given earlier. 4. The unannounced longer lifespan of a uniform 12 years per group member becomes null and void, whereby the corresponding impulses provided and transmitted by the central piece in the Sohar Center will be completely eliminated in every single group member in the course of 3 days from the present time. A new longer lifespan is being built up by impulses through the ongoing meditative exercise times in the Sohar Center. But this is graded in a new form, according to the individual evolutionary progress of the individual group members, so they each have the power in their own hands to form their longer lifespans in their number of hours, days, weeks, months, or years. Thus, the longer lifespan henceforth lies in the discretion of each group member himself, freely according to his own evolutionary progress in its own value. 5. The incarnation data in reference to locality remain the same for the individual group members. Therefore, no shifts occur in relation to this matter. 6. The current task of the internal group members lies in the values of the quickest possible evolution in every respect. On the one hand, this has to result through a strict self-learning activity of all attainable spirits, scientific data and matters, and on the other hand through becoming taught as well as through the meditative exercises, which must lead to the consequence of the utilization of the powers of consciousness. The good remainder of the task consists of actively exerting oneself for the construction of the site of the center, which should become the actual stronghold of knowledge and wisdom and the center of the dissemination and teaching of all interests in reference to the creative laws and commandments, and in reference to knowledge, wisdom, and love, which are already mentioned fundamentally, however, in the values of the mentioning of the laws and commandments. 7. The task of the coming time of later incarnations of the individual group members is rooted in the fact that they, through the present preparatory achieving of a higher evolution, become capable of instructively informing Earth humanity in the teaching of the Spirit, and in the utilization of the powers of consciousness. But their value should also increase in the way that they achieve teaching forms, in the sense that they become capable of giving advice in all matters, thus enabling them to instruct and advise the mass of Earth humanity in all authoritative matters. Thus, their task in the future time will be to become instructive in all spiritual and consciousness-strong matters as well as in all worldly matters, to stand above all material things and to be advisors for all human life forms, so for the forms of government as well as for those human beings living under these. But the group members should not be governors, but rather teachers in all interests, so also counselors in advice-giving positions, as this is given by the laws and commandments in cosmic form. So this also means not to be governing, but rather teaching, which is why the position is designated as a teacher, an instructor, which isn't to be equated in any way with an executive power, and with gain in material regard. Thus, it concerns a leading in spiritual value toward the concepts of justice, love, knowledge, and wisdom, which is why the life form exercising this value is called a spiritual leader. The value of a spiritual leadership, however, lies in the fact that only teaching and advice giving occur in one's performance of duty without any ambition toward commands so exercised and given in authoritative modesty. 8. It is given that the ordinal rules, which were already worked out at an earlier time in an advice-giving manner for the internal grouping, are to be recognized in all details and are to be acquired for application through thorough study, in order to find appropriate use and observance in the future. 9. The leading of the group and all of its interests is to be organized and put into appropriate ordinal rules, according to which also the spreading of the teaching, the entire construction, and the interests can be exercised in an authoritative and pertinent form. These ordinal rules should be determined in the form of an audience and should be worked out and drawn up by the internal group. It is still to be explained that the concerns declared now are final and can no longer be subject to change. This is truly the last worked out possibility of a solution from the High Council, which is definitely the last. But should the factor of negations and disorder appear contrary to expectations, again in the forms as they were given up to now, it would mean the absolute and complete destruction of the entire mission. Nothing could be done or undertaken anymore in order to find a possibility and solution again for the continued existence and the continuation of the mission. Over several millennia, more precisely said approximately 14 years, precipitations of quite malicious values which endangered all our plans and the whole mission, have entered over and over again. The requisitioned Earth human beings, who were prepared for the task and who declared themselves ready for it at earlier times as other personalities, often became disloyal as a result of materialism on the one hand and as a result of their egoism on the other hand. This, however, may no longer occur in the future. Otherwise this time everything will be destroyed to total annihilation. Hence it is given that every single group member strives from now on in the very best manner and without any proselytizing of everything, so for the interests of the group and its existence as well as for the dissemination and expansion of the teaching among and to all those life forms who have already further developed themselves in their evolution to such an extent that they are interested in it in a sincere form and even begin to recognize and understand the truth slowly or in already large measures. But given very first in line is the strict and rigorous effort of self-evolution in the highest possible measure, which is fundamentally connected with a strict control based on all individual, personal and negative characteristics, desires, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and actions and so on of each group member. Thus, as soon as possible, such negative characteristics must be brought under control, in order gradually to eliminate them completely and replace them with valuable characteristics that are to be newly developed in the sense of fulfilling the laws and commandments within the scope of the complete teaching of the Spirit. This means very hard work and a new learning time for each group member. That is very clear to us. But as each group member wants to progress in his evolution from now on in good measure and wants to be successful, a strict policy must be set up by each individual, and this must be accepted and implemented by the individual.
And how should these look?
These are to be prepared by each group member individually, according to one's sense of understanding and intellect in its own value.
So each group member must break his head over it himself.
That is of correctness. With that we have met the workload of our current work with your things and now have to go. But it is now necessary due to the advanced time that we perform a leap back in time, for otherwise we won't be back in time for the fulfillment of our duty.
The data are already set.
That is good.
Then let's go. Oh, we're already here again. That was fast. Well then, till we meet again, children, and all the best.
Till we meet again, my friend. Farewell.
Till we meet again, my friend, and pay everyone my dear greetings.
Please don't forget those for me too.
Okay, how high are we now? It seems damn high to me.
At 40 meters.
Well then bye, I'll now jump into the void there. Hopefully, you'll turn on the damn converter in time, or whatever it may be. Otherwise, I'll just rush into the void and then look at the daisies below. It would really make no difference to me. By then you two, maybe it is